The phone buzzed against my hip during the final hymn. My father's casket sat 6 feet away, draped in the American flag he'd earned serving 3 tours overseas, and my manager's name flashed across the screen like a neon sign advertising everything wrong with humanity. I should have silenced it, should have turned it off completely, but grief makes you do strange things, and some part of me thought maybe it was urgent enough to justify interrupting a funeral. Maybe someone had died. Maybe the building was burning down. Kira, where the hell are the Hallberg files? We've got the presentation in 40 minutes and they're nowhere in the system. My mother was dabbing tears 3 seats down. My 8-year-old nephew was asking my sister why Grandpa wasn't moving. The pastor was reading from Psalms about green pastures and still waters. And Dana Kellerman was screaming about quarterly projections through my phone speaker. I'm at my father's funeral, I whispered, pressing the device closer to my ear, hoping nobody could hear her voice carrying over the congregation. I told you last week I'd be out today. The files are in the shared drive under. Your personal drama can't affect our deadlines, Kira. The client specifically requested you handle this account, which means you need to walk me through every single document right now. I don't care if you're at a birthday party or whatever. Birthday party or whatever. My father had fought in Afghanistan. He'd taught me to ride a bike, helped me with algebra homework, walked me down the aisle at my wedding, held my hand through my divorce, and called me every Sunday for 32 years just to hear about my week. And to Dana Kellerman, his funeral was a birthday party or whatever. I'll handle everything Monday, I managed, my voice barely audible over the organ music. I can walk you through Monday. Kira, are you completely delusional? The presentation is today. Right now. Find someone with access to your computer and get them on the phone immediately, or you're looking at a performance review that'll make your head spin. She hung up. I sat there, staring at the black screen while my father's best friend from the service approached the podium to deliver a eulogy about honor and sacrifice and brotherhood. My phone stayed silent for exactly 90 seconds before it started buzzing again. Text after text after text. Where are you? Answer your phone. This is completely unprofessional. The client is asking questions. You're making the entire team look incompetent. Hi everyone, I'm Kira Hoffman, and before I continue with what happened next, please tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because I genuinely want to know how far this story reaches. Are you at work right now? At home? Maybe you're dealing with your own Dana Kellerman situation. Let me know, because honestly, after everything that happened, connecting with people who understand means everything to me. And please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how this plays out. Because what Dana didn't realize was that those 3 Hallberg files she was frantically searching for weren't missing by accident. They were exactly where I'd put them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up just a little bit so you understand exactly who Dana Kellerman was and why she thought she could treat people like disposable napkins. Dana ran the entire client services division at one of the biggest consulting firms in the city. Picture someone who treats quarterly reports like sacred texts and measures human worth in billable hours. She'd been with the company for 15 years, climbing the ladder by perfecting the art of taking credit for other people's work while somehow making their failures her personal success stories. The woman had connections everywhere. Her husband served on 3 different nonprofit boards. Her sister worked in the mayor's office. Her college roommate had become some kind of federal judge. When Dana wanted something to happen, it happened. When she wanted someone gone, they disappeared so completely it was like they'd never existed. And for 2.5 years, I'd been her favorite target. It started small, assigning me impossible deadlines, then expressing concern about my time management skills when I couldn't meet them. Scheduling mandatory team meetings during my lunch breaks, then commenting on how I seemed unwilling to prioritize team collaboration. Reassigning my biggest clients to other people, then questioning my commitment during review season. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, except each cut came with a smile and a concerned tone that made you wonder if maybe you really were the problem. The worst part? I was good at my job. Really good. My clients loved working with me. I consistently hit my targets. I'd brought in more new business that year than anyone else on the team. But Dana had mastered the art of making competence look like laziness and dedication look like attitude problems. 3 months before my father's funeral, she'd started what she called performance monitoring. Basically, I had to account for every minute of my day in 15-minute increments. Bathroom breaks, coffee runs, time spent thinking through complex client problems, everything documented, time-stamped, and submitted to her by end of business every single day. Just until we get your productivity back on track, she'd said, handing me the forms with that practiced expression of fake concern. I know you want to succeed here, Kira. Let's make sure you have every opportunity to do that. 2 weeks later, she'd noticed that I was spending too much time on individual client files and not enough time on team initiatives. The week after that, I was spending too much time in team meetings and not enough time on client work. The documentation became evidence of whatever she needed it to prove in any given moment. Then my father got diagnosed. Stage 4 lung cancer. 6 months, maybe 8, if the treatment went well. He'd never smoked a day in his life, but sometimes the universe doesn't care about fairness or logic or any of the rules we think govern how things are supposed to work. I told Dana immediately. Requested flexible scheduling for appointments and treatments. Provided documentation from his oncologist. Did everything by the book, because I'd learned that following proper procedures was the only way to protect yourself when you worked for someone who specialized in making your life miserable. Of course, she'd said, reviewing my request with that same fake sympathy she used for everything. Family comes first. We'll absolutely accommodate whatever you need during this difficult time. What she actually did was assign me 3 new major clients within a week. Clients with complex needs and tight deadlines. Clients who specifically requested frequent in-person meetings and rapid turnaround times. When I pointed out the contradiction, she expressed surprise that I couldn't handle my regular workload and suggested that perhaps I needed to evaluate my priorities and professional commitments. The next month was a nightmare of 16-hour days and weekend work sessions, racing from client meetings to chemotherapy appointments, answering emails during family dinners, reviewing contracts while sitting in hospital waiting rooms. My father was dying and I was drowning, and Dana Kellerman was standing on the shore taking notes about my swimming technique. But here's what she didn't know about me. I've always been a planner. Even as a kid. I kept detailed calendars and backup plans for everything. When other people saw chaos, I saw patterns. When they saw problems, I saw solutions waiting to be discovered. And for 2.5 years while Dana was busy making my life hell, I was busy taking notes. Every email. Every conversation. Every impossible deadline and every moving target. And every instance of taking credit for my work while blaming me for anything that went wrong. I documented everything with the same obsessive attention to detail that she demanded in my daily productivity reports. But more importantly, I'd been watching how she operated. Learning her patterns. Understanding her weaknesses. See, Dana's entire reputation was built on one thing, never losing a client. Ever. In 15 years, not a single account under her supervision had walked away unsatisfied. It was her golden achievement. The foundation of every promotion and every glowing performance review and every instance of upper management treating her like some kind of client relations genius. What nobody realized was that she maintained that perfect record by being incredibly careful about which clients she took on personally and which ones she delegated to other people. The safe, established accounts with minimal risk, those stayed on her desk. The challenging ones, the demanding ones, the ones most likely to cause problems, those got reassigned to team members who could be blamed if anything went wrong. But here's where Dana made her fatal mistake. She assumed that delegation meant she could step back completely. Once she handed off a difficult client, she stopped paying attention to the details. Stopped reading the fine print. Stopped checking the paperwork. She just trusted that everything would work out the way it always had. The Hallberg account was one of those difficult clients. A family-owned manufacturing company that had been burned by 3 different consulting firms in the past 5 years. They were suspicious, demanding, and absolutely ruthless about contract terms. Their legal department read every single clause with a microscope and challenged anything that seemed remotely unfavorable. Most consulting firms wouldn't touch them, the profit margins were too thin, the demands too unreasonable, the risk of negative reviews too high. But our company needed the business. And Dana needed someone to blame if things went sideways. So 3 months ago, she'd handed me the file with her usual fake concern and helpful suggestions. "I know you're dealing with a lot right now with your father's situation," she'd said, settling into the chair across from my desk like she was about to deliver a gift instead of another impossible assignment. "But I think this project might actually be perfect for you. The client specifically requested someone with your attention to detail. It's a great opportunity to really showcase your abilities." What she didn't mention was that the Hallberg family had fired their previous consultant for missing a single deadline. Or that their contract included penalty clauses that could cost our firm 6 figures if we failed to meet any of the agreed-upon benchmarks. Or that they'd specifically demanded weekly progress reports and monthly in-person presentations with zero tolerance for rescheduling. I'd read the contract anyway, cover to cover, including all the addendums and subclauses and legal fine print that most people skipped. And buried deep in Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph 3, I'd found something interesting, a termination clause that nobody had paid attention to. If the consulting firm failed to provide adequate service representation, specifically defined as having the same lead consultant present for all major project milestones, the client could terminate the contract immediately, with full refund requirements and liquidated damages. In other words, if I wasn't physically present for any of the 3 major presentations scheduled over the next 6 months, the Hallberg family could walk away with every penny they'd paid us, plus additional penalties that would make Dana's perfect client retention record look like amateur hour. And Dana, in her infinite wisdom and careful attention to detail, had never bothered to read that particular clause. The first presentation had gone perfectly. I'd prepared for weeks, anticipated every possible question, and delivered exactly what the Hallberg family wanted to hear. They'd been impressed enough to approve moving forward with Phase 2, which meant a bigger contract and higher stakes for everyone involved. The second presentation was scheduled for today, the day of my father's funeral. I'd tried to reschedule it 3 weeks ago, as soon as we'd gotten the final arrangements confirmed. Sent a professional email explaining the conflict, suggesting alternative dates, offering to have the presentation conducted via video conference if necessary. The Hallberg family had been understanding but firm. They were flying in specifically for today's meeting, had coordinated schedules with their entire executive team, and couldn't accommodate any changes. If we needed to reschedule, they'd be happy to discuss terminating the contract according to the terms outlined in Section 12. I'd forwarded that email to Dana immediately, along with a detailed explanation of what the termination clause meant and how much money we'd lose if I couldn't make the presentation. I'd requested backup support, suggested having another team member prepare to step in, asked for guidance on how she wanted to handle the situation. Dana's response had been a masterpiece of willful ignorance. "I'm sure you'll figure out how to manage your personal schedule around your professional commitments. Let me know if you need any additional resources." So I'd figured it out, all right. The morning of my father's funeral, I'd arrived at the office at 5 a.m. and spent 3 hours preparing 3 separate client files. The real Hallberg presentation materials, which I'd been working on for weeks, and 2 additional sets of documents that looked exactly like the Hallberg files but contained completely different information. Same formatting, same headers, same folder structure and naming conventions, but instead of the actual presentation Dana would need to salvage the situation, I'd filled them with outdated project proposals for completely different clients. Proposals that would make her look incompetent, unprepared, and completely unfamiliar with the Hallberg account. Then I'd placed all 3 sets of files in different locations on the shared server, labeled them with the same naming system we always used, and sent Dana a detailed email explaining exactly where to find everything. An email that was technically accurate, but would lead her to grab the wrong materials if she was rushing and not paying attention to the details, which, knowing Dana, she absolutely would be. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. She'd never suspect sabotage, because why would anyone be stupid enough to intentionally destroy their own project? She'd assume it was a filing error, a technical glitch, or just the kind of mistake that happened when someone was distracted by personal problems. And by the time she figured out what had gone wrong, the Hallberg family would already be sitting in the conference room, checking their watches and reviewing the termination clauses in their contract. My phone buzzed again while the pallbearers were carrying my father's casket to the hearse. Dana's name appeared on the screen, but this time, I didn't answer. I turned the volume all the way down and slipped it into my purse next to the funeral program. Whatever was happening at the office, she'd have to handle it herself. For the first time in 2.5 years, Dana Kellerman was going to discover what it felt like to be completely, utterly, professionally helpless. And the beautiful part was that she'd done it to herself, with her own arrogance and her own refusal to pay attention to the details that actually mattered. I followed my family to the cemetery, where we buried my father under an oak tree that had been growing for longer than our entire family had been alive. The pastor said more words about eternal rest and peaceful reunions. And I stood there thinking about how proud Dad would have been to know that his daughter had finally learned to fight back. The reception afterward was at my mother's house, casseroles and sympathy cards and relatives telling stories about fishing trips and Sunday dinners and all the ways my father had made their lives better just by being in them. I helped serve coffee and coordinate leftovers and listened to my uncle's speech about how Dad had always taught us to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. I didn't check my phone until after the last guest had left and my mother had gone upstairs to rest. Sitting alone in the kitchen where my father had eaten breakfast every morning for 23 years, I finally looked at the messages Dana had been sending all afternoon. 27 missed calls. 43 text messages. 12 voicemails that I could see just from the preview screens contained more profanity than I'd heard in my entire professional career. The final message, sent just 30 minutes ago, was different from the others. We need to talk first thing Monday morning. This situation is completely unacceptable and there will be consequences. I turned off the phone and sat there in the gathering darkness, thinking about consequences and choices and the difference between justice and revenge. My father was gone. My career was probably over. And Dana Kellerman was about to learn that sometimes, the people you underestimate are the ones who destroy you. Monday morning was going to be very interesting. I arrived at the office at 7:30, which was early even by my standards, but I wanted to be prepared for whatever conversation Dana had planned. The building felt different somehow, like the air pressure had changed overnight. People were whispering in clusters near the elevators, and I caught fragments of conversation that made my stomach flutter with anticipation. Complete disaster, client walked out, never seen anything like it. I settled at my desk and opened my computer, pretending to review emails while actually listening to every word being spoken within a 20-foot radius. It didn't take long to piece together what had happened. Friday afternoon, Dana had indeed grabbed the wrong files, not just one set, but somehow she'd managed to mix materials from all 3 fake presentations I'd prepared, creating a Frankenstein combination that made absolutely no sense to anyone involved. She'd walked into the Hallberg meeting with outdated proposals for a completely different industry, financial projections that didn't match their business model, and recommendations for solutions they'd never requested. But here's the part one hadn't anticipated. Instead of quietly acknowledging the mistake and trying to reschedule, Dana had decided to bluff her way through the entire presentation. She'd spent 45 minutes trying to convince the Hallberg family that they were wrong about their own business needs and that our alternative approach was actually more innovative than what they had originally requested. According to Janet from accounting, who'd heard the story from someone in facilities management. The Hallberg family had listened politely for exactly 12 minutes before the company president had stood up and asked Dana if she was familiar with their actual business operations, or if this was some kind of elaborate practical joke. That's when Dana had made her second fatal mistake. She doubled down. Instead of admitting the error and apologizing, she'd gotten defensive and started lecturing them about thinking outside the box and embracing disruptive innovation. She'd actually told them they were being closed-minded about their own industry. The meeting had ended with the Hallberg president reading aloud from Section 12 of their contract while his legal team took notes. They'd terminated the agreement on the spot, demanded immediate refund of all fees paid, and informed Dana that they'd be filing a formal complaint with the State Business Licensing Board about unprofessional conduct and breach of contract. But wait, it gets better. See, what I discovered during my obsessive documentation of Dana's behavior was that she had a pattern of blaming her team members when things went wrong. Any project that succeeded was due to her leadership and strategic vision. Any project that failed was because someone under her supervision had made critical errors, despite her best efforts to provide guidance and support. So when the Hallberg disaster exploded in her face, Dana's first instinct was to throw me under the bus. She'd spent Friday evening sending emails to upper management explaining how my personal issues and unprofessional behavior had sabotaged a major client relationship. She attached copies of my time-off requests and medical documentation as evidence that I was distracted and unreliable during a critical project phase. What Dana didn't realize was that our IT department kept detailed logs of every file access and modification. When the senior partners started investigating exactly how such a massive presentation failure had occurred, they discovered that Dana had accessed the server at 2:47 p.m. on Friday afternoon, 23 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. She'd had less than half an hour to prepare for a presentation that should have required days of review and rehearsal. And instead of reading the actual materials, she'd grabbed random files and assumed everything would work out fine because it always had before. The IT logs also showed that I had uploaded the correct presentation materials at 5:12 a.m. on Friday morning, with detailed file names and folder organization that any competent manager should have been able to navigate. There was a complete digital trail proving that all necessary materials had been available and properly labeled for over 9 hours before Dana had bothered to look for them. When confronted with this evidence, Dana had tried to claim that the files were mislabeled and confusing, which led to someone actually checking the content of what I'd uploaded. The real Hallberg presentation was flawless, professional, thorough, and exactly what the client had requested. If Dana had used those materials instead of whatever random documents she'd grabbed, the meeting would have been a complete success. Upper management was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about Dana's attention to detail and her habit of blaming team members for her own failures, questions that became even more uncomfortable when they started reviewing her other recent projects and discovered a pattern of last-minute scrambling and delegation without oversight. I was reviewing emails and pretending to work when Dana finally arrived at 8:45, looking like she'd slept in her car and forgotten that makeup was supposed to be applied with some degree of precision. She walked directly to my desk without stopping at her office, and I could see people throughout the department suddenly finding reasons to organize their filing cabinets and sharpen pencils. Conference room. Now. I followed her into the glass-walled meeting space where she delivered so many lectures about professional accountability and team collaboration. She closed the door and turned to face me with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering her previous stance on workplace violence. "You want to explain to me what happened Friday?" "I was at my father's funeral," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "As you knew, when you called me during the service to ask about files that were clearly labeled and properly organized on the shared server. Don't you dare try to make this about your personal problems. You sabotaged that presentation deliberately, and I have proof." "What proof is that?" Dana pulled out her phone and started scrolling through screenshots with the frantic energy of someone who'd spent the weekend trying to build a case that didn't exist. "These file names make no sense. The organization is completely illogical. You deliberately made it impossible for anyone to find the correct materials. The files were organized alphabetically by client name, then chronologically by presentation date, using the same naming convention we've used for every project in the past 2 years. The same system you approved during our team training session last September. That's not. Dana stopped scrolling and stared at her phone screen like it had personally betrayed her. You changed something. You moved files around to make me look incompetent. I can show you the IT access logs if you'd like. Every file modification is timestamped and tracked. The presentation materials were uploaded Friday morning at 5:12 a.m. and never touched again until you accessed the server 23 minutes before the meeting. The color drained from Dana's face as she realized what I was actually saying. She'd been so focused on finding evidence of sabotage that she'd never considered the possibility that everything had been exactly where it was supposed to be. You should have been there, she said finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. The client specifically requested you. You knew how important this was. I requested time off 3 weeks in advance. I provided documentation. I explained the conflict and asked for guidance on how you wanted to handle the situation. I didn't mean. You told me to handle it. So I did. I prepared materials so thorough and well organized that any competent manager should have been able to deliver a successful presentation with minimal preparation time. The failure wasn't in my planning or my documentation or my professional commitment. The failure was in assuming that someone else would take responsibility for actually reading what I'd prepared. Dana sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs, looking like someone who just realized she'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. This is going to destroy my career. Your career destroyed itself. I just documented the process. And that's when she broke, completely. Not the controlled, professional breakdown of someone who'd been caught in a mistake, but the ugly, desperate collapse of someone who'd built their entire identity on a foundation that had just crumbled beneath them. She started crying, real tears, not the crocodile performance she'd used whenever she needed to seem sympathetic during difficult conversations. She talked about her mortgage payments and her daughter's college tuition and her reputation in the industry. She begged me to help her find a way to fix the situation, to talk to the senior partners, to take partial responsibility for what had happened. For a moment, sitting there, watching this powerful woman reduced to begging for mercy from someone she'd spent years tormenting, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered my father's funeral. The phone calls during the final hymn. The text messages while they lowered his casket into the ground. The complete disregard for basic human decency, disguised as professional dedication. You have exactly 10 minutes to clean out your desk before security escorts you from the building, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. The senior partners are announcing your termination at the 9:30 department meeting. I'd suggest you use those 10 minutes wisely. The meeting that followed was surreal. Our department head stood at the front of the conference room and explained that Dana Kellerman's employment had been terminated due to gross negligence and failure to maintain professional standards. The Hallberg account had been reassigned to me personally, with a promotion to senior consultant and a salary increase that would take effect immediately. They also announced new policies about client relationship management and presentation preparation, specifically designed to prevent the kind of last-minute scrambling that had led to Friday's disaster, policies that I'd actually suggested in emails to Dana over the past 6 months, all of which she dismissed as unnecessary micromanagement. The irony was so perfect, it almost felt scripted. Over the next few weeks, I learned exactly how thoroughly Dana's professional reputation had been destroyed. The Hallberg family had indeed filed complaints with multiple business organizations, and word had spread quickly through the industry about the consultant who tried to lecture a successful manufacturing company about their own business model using materials for a completely different client. Other firms started reaching out to our company's former clients, suggesting that perhaps they'd like to explore alternative consulting options with organizations that maintained higher standards of professional competence. We lost 3 major accounts within a month, all of them specifically citing concerns about quality control and attention to detail. Upper management responded by implementing a complete review of all client relationships supervised by Dana over the past 2 years. They discovered billing irregularities, missed deadlines that had been covered up, and multiple instances of promising client services that were never actually delivered. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Dana had been playing a shell game with client satisfaction for years, moving problems around and deflecting blame while presenting herself as the solution to issues she'd actually created. And somehow nobody had noticed until the day she'd finally run out of people to blame. As for me, the Helberg family loved working with someone who actually understood their business and took time to prepare properly for meetings. They signed an extended contract for twice the original scope, specifically requesting that I remain their primary point of contact for all future projects. My new position came with an office that had windows and a door that actually closed. I hired an assistant whose job was to organize files and maintain documentation, ensuring that no client would ever again be subjected to the kind of unprofessional disaster that had ended Dana's career. And every morning when I arrived at work, I passed the conference room where Dana had spent her final 10 minutes as a manager, frantically shoving personal items into a cardboard box while security guards waited by the door. The space had been converted into a client meeting room with comfortable chairs and updated technology, and a small plaque by the entrance recognizing the importance of professional excellence and attention to detail in client relationships. I'd recommended that plaque personally. 6 months later I was having lunch with my mother when she asked if I'd ever heard anything more about my former manager. Dana had apparently applied for several positions at other consulting firms, but word traveled fast in our industry. Nobody wanted to hire someone with a reputation for incompetence and client mismanagement. "Do you feel bad about what happened to her?" my mother asked, cutting her sandwich into precise triangles the way she'd done when I was 8 years old. I thought about that question for a long time, about justice and revenge and the difference between consequences and cruelty, about phone calls during funerals and fake concern disguised as professional development. "I feel bad that it took so long," I said finally. "And I feel bad that other people had to suffer before someone finally held her accountable for her behavior." My mother nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "Your father always said that bullies count on good people being too polite to fight back. He would have been proud of you for standing up for yourself. He would have been." I know that because I can still hear his voice sometimes, especially on Sunday mornings when I'm drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, reminding me that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone continue hurting people. Dana Kellerman taught me that lesson without meaning to. She showed me exactly what happens when someone mistakes fear for respect and confuses cruelty with competence. And in the end, she gave me the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever realized, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing someone to face the natural consequences of their own choices. So here's what I want you to know, wherever you're listening from, whatever situation you might be dealing with in your own life, documentation matters. Patterns matter. And sometimes the people who seem most powerful are actually the most vulnerable, because they've built their entire identity on a foundation of other people's fear. If you're dealing with your own Dana Kellerman, start taking notes. Keep records. Pay attention to the details they ignore. And remember that bullies only win when good people decide it's easier to stay quiet than to fight back. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes it just needs a little help. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and tell me in the comments about your own experiences with workplace bullies or impossible managers. Have you ever had to deal with someone who seemed untouchable? How did you handle it? I read every single comment, and honestly, connecting with people who understand what it's like to feel powerless in these situations means everything to me. And please subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one, because unfortunately the workplace is full of people like Dana Kellerman. And someone needs to talk about what it's really like to deal with them. Someone needs to remind the rest of us that we're not as powerless as we think we are. Thanks for listening to my story. Thanks for being here. And remember, Sometimes the best revenge is just letting someone be exactly who they really are when it finally matters.